Next on our agenda is 6.2, the board equity goals. Dr. Salem. And her many friends.
Well, thank you for letting us be here to present tonight on some really exciting work that's been taking place in our district over the past year. You as a board last summer identified 4 priority areas that you asked LPS staff to convene committees and work on to create an action plan for more equitable outcomes in these 4 areas moving forward. So tonight is the representation of all of that work. We also have a co-chair from each of these 4 committees here to answer questions and provide additional input as we go through this formal report. So we're going to start with this. At some point over the last year, each of these people up here has said, I have the best committee. And they were all right. They all had the best committee. Dr. Joel often talks about when we call on Lincoln to step up and rise to the occasion, they always do that. And so as we go through the names of staff members and community members, you will see that reflected. We do have members of these committees here with us tonight, so if you participated in the committee work surrounding these 4 areas, would you please stand? Great. We had members from the community, administrators, teachers, parents, students. This was a very wide net that was cast, and so you'll see that reflected with the many voices that participated in this project. The purpose of the action plan is to do 2 things simultaneously: celebrate all of the work that's been done since the start of the last strategic plan 5 years ago, but also acknowledge and address the disparities that continue to exist in our data in Lincoln Public Schools. So this board often says all means all, a lot says all means all, and we hope that this is a living, breathing document that shows that we have actions behind those words and that those are not empty, that we support all students in Lincoln Public Schools. We also believe when you look at these strategies that you will see that all students benefit from these strategies. So while you charged us with looking at barriers and looking at disparities for our students of color, we know that when you see these action steps, you will also see these benefit all of our students. When we get better as a district, we get better for all of our students. So a little bit of context. This all kicked off from your Board of Education retreat last June. And you all engaged in a visioning activity in which you had to answer the question, what would you want the Journal-Star headline to read 3 years from now? And what data would support us getting there? What would it take? And so as your conversation developed, you selected 4 priorities that rose to the surface for this group. With that, you then charged LPS staff to come up with specific measurables for each one of those priorities, and committees were formed. The co-chairs you also see were selected to lead this work because they have specific expertise in these areas and were able to help select really great committee membership and facilitate the work. The co-chairs also met themselves together all along the process to make sure that they were looking for alignment and themes that came out of all of the groups. So here we are, April 12th, with a formal report of that work. As a reminder, here are the 4 priority areas that we're going to go through tonight. Really important to point out that measurable objective. So we didn't just want to highlight what is the priority, we also wanted to make sure we had a measurable that all of our schools could work towards as they do their school improvement work. So you'll see that reflected. When we get into the action steps, there are over 40 strategies. So we will be going through just the action steps, and we'll show the community how they can actually get online and look through the full report of all action steps and strategies. So here's the work of the committees this year. They started with their baseline data and the measurable targets, and their job was to look at root causes, look at the research, and then create action steps that next year will lead to implementation. It was really critical, and the committees did a really nice job. It's critical that root cause analysis comes before actions. And you'll see when the action steps are presented they're really in response to what the committees felt were the greatest root causes for why our data may have some disproportionality. Each group has their own action plan, has their own action steps and strategies, but I also want to say this is a very collaborative group that you see, and everybody who was on the committee. They had a shared folder, so they got to see each other's slides, the articles they were using. They had a lot of information that they shared back and forth. In fact, members of one committee went to present to another committee. You see Barb Miller, who is on the Honors Course Enrollment Committee, going to present her work with the honors cadre to the Graduation Rate Committee. So there were lots of opportunities because of the great expertise that we had for a lot of cross-collaboration. So before we get to the strategies, we do want to point out it's sometimes just habit when you start these processes to think about what could we add? What new do we have to do to address these issues? And our committees did a really nice job of thinking about what might be a better use of our resources if we find something that's already working to expand it or enhance it or make it more effective or efficient. And so you'll see in the formal written report, each of these 4 committees actually lays out the list of current strategies that are happening in the district. So we'll start with graduation rate. As you'll see, when you look at the committee members, this represents pre-K-12 work. So principals who have preschools in their buildings, all the way up through teachers who are at traditional high schools, teachers who teach in some of our smaller settings like Bryan Community or the Career Academy, and then you can see a lot of individuals who come to us from community organizations such as the Lighthouse, CLCs, and Lancaster County Attorney. So here's their baseline data that they started with. It's a lot to take in, but the most important point is it's not just about the overall graduation rate. There are also more aggressive targets that were set for different student groups to make sure that we're not only raising all graduation rate, but that we're also closing that gap. One of the first hurdles or challenges that this committee had to face was the massive amount of data we have as a district. Now that's a good thing. It's great to have a lot of data. They relied heavily on our Department of Assessment and Evaluation, who helped with the data request. So this committee would ask them for, can you get us a list of the percentage of students who passed X class? Can you get us a list, if I look at a specific school, of how many students are credit deficient? They were continuing to ask for data that would drive that work. But for this goal to be successful, it has to be a pre-K-12 goal. So what that means is we don't attribute graduation rate to elementary schools. So elementary schools are going to be looking at things like the percentage of students reading on grade level. They're going to look at elementary report card grades and assessments. Middle schools are going to be looking at pass failure rates. So there's a lot of different pieces of data that schools will be looking at, not just the graduation rate. So here are the 3 proposed action steps. As I mentioned earlier, those things in bold represent what the committee determined was a possible root cause for disproportionality in our data. Underneath each of those action steps are strategies. And again, we'll go through with the public how they can access all of the strategies. But we'll give an example. So if you look at action step number 2, there is a strategy within that action step to expand graduation pathways, a really successful program in Lincoln Public Schools. But the committee was wondering about how might we be more creative? How might we expand something that's already working? And so as we go through these strategies and you see the full list, there are certain strategies that have asterisks next to them, which will designate to you or to the community that they require budget resource and will come to you as a budget request. We also want to point out that because there are multiple strategies, like I said, over 40, we do have an implementation plan as well that goes through the tasks and the people responsible for leading the work. Positive behavior. We have Russ Ewing, who is a co-chair, also Dr. Fundis, who is a co-chair of this committee. You can see a heavy involvement in student advocacy. We see therapists, we see community members, we see student advocates, we have teachers, counselors, school psychologists. Their focus was the whole child. So inside and outside of the classroom, what are all of the things we want to do to encourage positive behavior in our classrooms? At this point in the presentation, eyes can glaze over when we talk about risk ratios, but it is very important to know what data we're looking at. So when you think about a risk ratio, what you're really asking is this student group more likely than all students to have a suspension? So a risk ratio of 1.7, for example, would mean that that student group is 1.7 times more likely to receive a suspension than the average of all students. So this group, again, not only wants to reduce total suspensions, but also reduce disproportionality. We should point out, over 95% of our students are never suspended. So it's not just about suspension, it's about positive behavior in general, creating environments where students want to come to school and they're successful. This committee, not only did they have lots of adult voices, they actually went out to schools. They went to Nuremberger, and they went to Yankee Hill, and they talked to our Equity Scholar group, and they actually started to give them a draft of what they might present to get feedback. And students were able to provide their own voice and give representative quotes about, yes, you're on the right track, or have you thought about this? And those students were really candid in giving their feedback. So the 2 action steps, we did not mislabel. So 1, 2, 3 was from graduation rate, 4 and 5 are from the Positive Behavior Committee, with a focus on restorative and trauma-informed practices and ensuring that we implement our MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, with fidelity in every single school and program. Honors course enrollment almost didn't fit on the slide. It's a big committee, but they needed all of those voices. Every person on here had incredible expertise. They were looking at not only the gifted program, but also honors course enrollment. And so they had kind of a dual purpose, but that goes hand in hand. You can see they actually did have students on their committee who could provide their feedback from their time in Lincoln Public Schools, and they had a wealth of information from community members who had had their own students go through Lincoln Public Schools. So as you can see, the data chart represents 6 through 12, but we know, and the committee was very aware of the fact, that this starts at the elementary level. Are we preparing all students for rigorous coursework? Do we position all students as capable, which is a huge focus of the Department of Curriculum and Instruction? And so while that starts at elementary, we will see that show up in our data in honors course enrollment in grades 6 through 12. So this committee did a lot of really interesting things, and they did it in 3 separate groups. One of the groups was the Historical and Current Practices group. What they did is actually investigate how has Lincoln Public Schools historically identified students for gifted? What are the policies and practices that have been in place? They also had a literature review committee that went through what is the best literature and research out there today around how to ensure that we get the right students in gifted, that we identify students and we're not just looking for one thing when we think of what makes a gifted learner. And then they also had a comparison subgroup that sent surveys to other school districts in Nebraska to compare what do we do compared to what are some of our peers doing across the state. And only the best of the best even received a survey. So those surveys were sent to those districts that have a track record of success in this area. And because they were looking at both gifted and honors course enrollment, they have quite a few action steps and strategies listed with some themes. So you'll see a theme is communication. Do all parents, when they enroll their child in Lincoln Public Schools, know what is offered in our gifted program? Do parents know what courses are offered in middle school and high school? So you'll see communication is a major theme in their report. An example of a strategy here underneath action step number 11 is possibly phasing in Lincoln Public Schools providing the cost for AP exams. That's an example of a barrier for a lot of families when it comes to that credit and that exam. But like we said earlier, that helps all students. So that's something that is breaking down that barrier, but hopefully has benefits beyond just those students. And last but not least, we have the diverse staff group. Looking at this list, you can see they clearly wanted input from higher education. We've got Doane and UNL represented, and we also have teachers from diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds. And that was the whole point, is to ask them, why did you choose Lincoln Public Schools? What are we doing that can help recruit? And how do we retain our staff of color? So here's what their data looked like as a baseline. And one of their first conversations was really around, we can't just hire our way to 8.1%. We also have to retain staff and make sure that all staff feel valued and seen and want to remain in Lincoln Public Schools. So they broke in again to 3 subcommittees, and if you think about the cycle of hiring a teacher, it is incredibly complex. So it's not just go to the right recruiting fair. It's we've got to recruit them, we've got to have them want to choose Lincoln Public Schools. Sometimes there's certification or out of state, does their license transfer? It's a really complex process. And so each of those 3 committees looked at what might be a hurdle as we recruit, as we hire, and as we retain. So their action steps actually follow those 3 root causes: recruiting efforts, hiring practices, and retention. An example of a strategy in this committee underneath action step 13 is actually developing our own professional learning around implicit bias within hiring practices, an investigation of our system-wide practices when it comes to interviews and hiring. So next steps, today's April 12th, and tomorrow already we have 2 groups that we'll be meeting with. Elementary principals and a teacher from each school, the school improvement co-chair, will get a very similar presentation with time to process and think about how this will be implemented in their school. April 14th, we then meet with secondary principals and summer workshops, which everybody up here helps facilitate and lead. This will be the focus that starts off and kicks off all of those workshops. So how can the community learn more about this plan and see all of the 40+ strategies? A copy of this presentation, along with a formal written report that actually provides context around all of this work and how the committee structured their work, can all be found at lps.org/all. And you'll see there's the tabs across the top that will allow community members to go in, look at the action steps and the strategies, along with the plan for implementation. So we have reached the opportunity for questions. That's a lot of information. It's really hard to boil down hours and hours of this community work into 15 to 20 minutes, but we really wanted to honor the work that they've done. So if we can answer any additional questions.
Perfect. We'll go ahead and take questions. I have Kathy, then Lanny.
I'm going to start by your first action step, which was graduation rate. And you talked about recovering credits, earning credits, so it's on time versus extra years. Talk about the differences there for our students and parents so that they know the difference and what their kids can get.
So the state of Nebraska actually calculates a 4-year graduation rate and a 7-year graduation rate. One thing that Lincoln Public Schools has always been proud of is that even if a student doesn't graduate in 4 years, our graduation rate for 5th, 6th, and even 7th year students continues to be really high. We do not give up on kids. And so when you think about possible credit recovery, you might have a student in a graduation pathway that only needs 1 class, or they only need 1 unit of 1 class. And you also have students who need multiple classes, or need a different schedule, or an altered schedule, or need to be able to come at night to finish up coursework. So it may not follow a traditional pathway, but we don't give up on that kid, and we still provide programs and teachers designed to help them be successful and graduate.
Thank you. And the second part in that same genre was the transition from 5th to 6th and 8th to 9th. I just have to say my observation, having only 9th graders in schools the first day of schools and only in high schools and 6th graders in middle school is phenomenal. The kids are just learning all about going from a single classroom where they move maybe a little bit during the day to specials to moving every period. And my observation, having been in the schools on the first day, this is a huge change that I'm glad we've implemented. Perspective from your committee on the transitions.
Yeah, I have a 5th grader that should be at the Scott orientation right now, so I can tell you more about transitions after that. But I'll let Pat talk about the process, and we also have Brenda Lejadro, who is on a different committee but has expertise in this area, talk about the transitions that we have in place.
So what you discussed, the 6th grade day and the 9th grade day are great because those kids you're amazed at how willing they are to ask questions and just participate in the day. And the next day when the older students come, they're quiet again and they just want to get to class. So those things are great. But a lot of it too is the talking that's going on between schools and between teachers and counselors, so that we're not spending 2 weeks, 3 weeks figuring out a student. That the new school knows the student when they walk in the door, and they're ready to make it work from day one. And so those transition activities are so important, so we don't spend time trying to figure out a student. We know them when they come. We have to get to know them better, but we know them from the first day.
Thank you. This is a great presentation. I have lots more, but I'm going to share my space here with my colleagues.
Lanny.
First, I'd like to say thank you to Sarah, to Van, to Takako, Pat, Russ, for your leadership on this. I know seeing the work that your committees have done, this is the result of months of work and dozens of people, and it, of course, builds on years of work that we've done on this. As I look at those 4 focus areas of graduation rate, very obvious that that's our ultimate measure of success of graduating students. And thinking about earlier tonight, we saw the video of students talking about what it means to see themselves reflected in our staff, which is also one of those 4 areas. Also, when we think about suspensions, and if you're not in school, you're not receiving instruction. But I did wonder on the 3rd one, on honors course enrollment, could you talk a little bit about how participation in an honors course or a differentiated curriculum helps support a student achieving graduation?
You know, when we did the literature review for the committee, one of the things that they talked about was students who are taking AP courses early on in their high school career, so freshmen, more than likely they will be taking more rigorous courses for years to come until they complete their high school career. So from that standpoint, they are challenging themselves. Therefore, they have more connections and collaboration with teachers and having to feel like they belong to high school. That has a direct impact, I believe, in graduation rate.
Thank you so
And I would also say everything connects. So when you have students who feel like people at school expect them to be there and they're involved in rigorous work and they are motivated to do that work, they're more likely to come to school. They're less likely to have behavior concerns and more likely to graduate.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'll have a comment at the end, but I'll defer to my colleagues for questions.
Perfect. I have Barb, then Kathy, then Bob.
Great work. Pardon me. A lot of energy has gone into this. I'm really pleased to see this. So I have a lot of nitpicky questions you probably have covered, but it would be good to hear about. So for me, a lot of our students from diverse backgrounds start out in kindergarten behind. So does this plan include going and expanding opportunities for full day, full year pre-K?
So one of the things that we talked about, especially in the graduation rate committee, is part of that transition action plan is investigating all of the current things we have in place for transition to pre-K, pre-K to K. So all of those are fair game for that upcoming conversation about what might need to happen.
I think that's really important that we help our students be ready for school. That's why I bring it up. Then I notice all our data focused on in this report on students of color, but another group that is often left behind are our SPED students. And I want to take a moment to explain to the public that our special education students are as diverse as could possibly be, and you might be surprised to find out that one of the largest groups is speech language development and delays, like around 1,200 kids that in a given year. So, but all the stats that I've looked at show that our SPED students experience greater disproportionate interactions with suspensions and expulsions, have more problems academically, and so what is this plan doing for them?
That's a good question. One of the things we talked about, and you're absolutely right, one of the things that we talked about early on in this presentation was that many of the action steps, while we were charged with looking at the disproportionalities in what we report to the state in terms of the different student demographic groups along race and ethnicity, one of the things that all of the committees talked about was these need to also be strategies that support all students. So I'll give you an example. In the graduation rate action step, one of the things that they had a long conversation about was Tier 1 instruction. And so what that means is when you walk into a classroom having the highest caliber teaching and learning going on, well, we need to do a better job of professional learning so that all of our staff and all of our professional developers, we know how to use language supports that support ELL learners. We know how to scaffold instruction so that students who may struggle or start off behind know how to approach that work and have access to that content. So it's not, when we talk about Tier 1 instruction, we're not only talking about for one student group. We're talking about strategies that support all students who may be behind in learning.
Another group that experiences a lot of disproportionate outcomes are students that come from low-income families. And you started to touch upon that a little bit with the AP courses. Does this plan go and take into consideration those that are coming from low-income backgrounds?
Yeah, a lot of the action steps, you specifically mentioned the honors course enrollment, but I would actually say all three of the ones dealing with students are looking at what are the things that might be barriers. And we know that poverty or lack of resources can be a barrier. So when they identified as a committee all of the things that are currently happening, things such as AVID, things that we look at when we think about first-generation college-going students, all of those things support those learners that you're talking about, not just focusing on students of color, but focusing on any reason why a student may have disproportionate outcomes or been historically underserved.
And so that leads me to the question of how does the community become involved? And I mean that in two different ways. One, we have a very rich nonprofit community in Lincoln, Nebraska. We also have a lot of parents and individuals who might not be parents, who are also supportive of our public schools. When I'm thinking about the disproportionate outcomes, I'm just thinking about just those life experiences that kids have through the arc of their childhood and not getting to experience them because of income issues. That in and of itself can hold so many behind. So could you explain how this plan here is working with the community?
Yeah, that's where the exciting part starts next school year. One of the action steps that's specifically tied to graduation rate, but man, it could be tied to all of them, is a Get Involved campaign. And so that is using members of our CLC staff. Nola Derby-Bennett was on that graduation rate committee that came up with that action plan. And so that's actually one of the strategies listed that you didn't see up there. But that'll be the work of next year. How do we get all of our community partners, now that we've set our goal and set our action steps, we're going to need help from a lot of people in our community. So whether it's CLCs, you saw the Lighthouse, they already partner with us on our Alternative to Suspension program. So now that we have these steps in place, we're going to have to use our community partners to expand what they're already doing or help us reach some of these things that we haven't put in place yet.
Would you encourage individuals to go and join our teammates program, to go and, because a lot of our kids, I remember when my son was in elementary school and a number of his friends had teammate mentors starting in, first and second grade who followed them all the way through to high school. And that was so important. But we have a waiting list for that, don't we?
We do. We have a waiting list of students who are waiting for a teammate. Again, I would say, at risk of sounding like a broken record, that's all of our goals. So we know, and research says, that when a student has a one-on-one connection with an adult, they are much more likely to graduate from high school. And so whether we're talking about positive behavior and a student feeling known or seen, and I would say as a teammate, as I think people up here are teammates as well, it really is also awesome for the teammate, right? Not just the student. And so as our community pitches in to help this work, yeah, that would be a wonderful thing to do.
So my son went to a elementary school that had over 95% poverty. And so the word hope, when I would go to eat lunch with him and I talk with his friends, the word hope wasn't very common. So I really love our Career Academy. I love our focus programs. We have so much going on that's positive at LPS. But how do we get to those kids when they're pre-K and elementary school, when they're going and sizing us adults in the adult world up? Are we reaching out to them so that they know that there's things like the Learn to Dream scholarship, that there is the Career Academy, that there are things that are there for them?
Barb, I'm going to be honest. One of the things that came out of all of these is that as a district, we need to be doing a better job of communicating everything we have to offer. It's great that we have so many focus programs. It's great that we have a lot of opportunity, but you saw that come through in a lot of the action steps. Is one of the things we need to do is simply do a better job of clearly communicating what's available. And so you're right. That's part of, for example, transitions. Do all parents know what that transition looks like and know when they get to the next level? Here would be the course of study. Here are some alternative options that are available to you that you may not know about. So you're right, communication is a big part of all of these actions.
And I would go and stress communication to our students, because I came from a background where I had one parent and he was not highly functioning. And so if I hadn't been communicated to as a student all the way through, I would have never heard those messages. I was in a small town, and that small town just coalesced around different kids, and I was very lucky. But we're in a, compared to where I came from, a big city. And so going and getting that message out to the students themselves, I think is really, really critical.
Good point. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for this report. Thank you all for your good work. I'm looking forward to seeing the progress that we make over the next year. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I have Kathy with a comment.
So one of my observations, something you said, that 95% of our students have never been suspended. Perception versus reality. There are a whole lot of people that think LPS is just rampant with kids that aren't making it. That's not the case, is it?
No. And I'll let Russ Ewing talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, our schools do a great job of, communicating expectations and just working on a daily basis of having great environments to learn. That's a big part of what they do, because they know, we know that students have to be safe, feel safe, be comfortable, know what to expect, have people who care about them to learn. And so a lot of focus is made around that. And so, you know, that is really, you go into any of our buildings, and that's the environment that's there.
Thank you. And as a teammate mentor, I would tell everybody to sign up. I'm on my 4th teammate. It's been an awesome experience, sometimes a frustrating experience, but I know my kids made it because we all worked together on it. And the next was on the honors courses, the AP courses, advanced placement courses. Are they limited to the number of students that can be involved in them?
No. We welcome all the students who are interested in challenging themselves to go for it. I mean, that is probably one of the biggest things that we need to communicate with our students with.
I know that I had a child many years ago that was a sophomore at Northeast, and that was the youngest grade at Northeast, so I've been around a day or two. And she was in an AP course. They said, "Why is she there?" And I said, "Because the other class was too easy, and she drives me crazy if courses are too easy. So let her be in there and work a little harder." And how does a student get into an honors course or an AP course or into a gifted program if they don't hit a quote-unquote percentile?
That is a really good question. We are looking at multiple data points to make sure that, for instance, for gifted program, we're looking into second graders taking COGAT and using opt-out rather than opt-in, so that students who qualify for 90th percentile to make sure that they are looked at through our high ability learners program. The other thing is AP courses are open for everybody. There may be a perception that students who are taking differentiated courses are the only ones who are accepted to AP courses. That is not the case. Students who are interested in history or social studies can get into taking AP Human Geography as a freshman, which we're asking you guys to pay for. And then, so that those students will be more interested in taking AP World History and AP US History and AP Government and Politics. We want to start the momentum for our students so that they know they're capable. That's the positioning students as capable mindset that we're trying to place our students with.
And last question, and just so you know, I don't ever ask a question I don't already know the answer to. So, do all schools have high ability learning and differentiated courses in them?
Yes, ma'am, we do.
Every school in LPS offers that course.
Every elementary, middle, and high schools, yes.
And it doesn't matter whether it's a poor neighborhood, a wealthy neighborhood, north, south, east, or west.
That is correct.
Thank you so much.
I have Bob next.
Yeah, I was just going to talk a little bit, ask some questions about workforce. And the rural healthcare workforce, it was growing your own was the best long-term strategy with mentoring, recruitment, and scholarships. And I don't know if you or Van had anything you'd add as far as getting some of our own kids to become those teachers in the future.
So we recognize, and what we found out during this year is how important our connections to our institutions are in terms of bringing them into the high schools and even into the middle schools and helping to help students see themselves at universities and see themselves as teachers, as counselors, as administrators. And so we are forming some really positive partnerships. One of the programs that I learned about this year that I'm really, really pleased with is a program we have going at Lincoln High right now. It is booming. And I think it's booming because of Dr. Amanda Morales, who's here tonight, and her commitment to helping LPS, and also to Mr. Don Martinez and a couple of others at Lincoln High that are saying, hey, we see all these amazing students walking our halls that could be our future teachers, and we need to just grab them in and let them know we've noticed them and that they need to be teaching for us. And when we did our Aspiring Educators Symposium here a couple of weeks ago, those students came into that space and they were really, really excited, number one, to be asked, and number two, to have a day that was dedicated to them. And so that is one of the programs. We have other programs that are particular. So, for example, our para tuition reimbursement program is something we're strengthening, and I think Dr. Salem made a really good point, is we have a number of things going on in LPS, and we have for a number of years, but it's about really fine-tuning and making sure that we are implementing a lot of those things with fidelity.
Lanny.
Thank you. As this plan came up through the Student Learning Committee, I think I've now had the opportunity to see it presented 6 times. And I've also had the opportunity to listen to my colleagues make their comments and ask questions. And so I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts. The All Means All Action Plan for Equitable Outcomes reflects our responsibility to ensure that students are treated fairly. Equity means fairness. Equity will be achieved when we can no longer predict educational outcomes and experiences by race, ethnicity, or other demographic factors. Instead, student outcomes and experiences will be determined by their choices, efforts, and talents. We're not there yet. Much work remains ahead of our district and community. As a board, we must be prepared to support that work through our strategic plan, our policy decisions, and our budget. By identifying specific measurables and committing to taking action to improve them, we have reached another important milestone on the road to ensuring that all means all.
Thank you, Lanny. Any further questions? Last thing I'm going to ask Dr. Salem is that anyone in the audience that had anything to do with this, you have to stand up. And we have to thank you. I know you don't want to. It's too bad. Get up. Thank you so much. You all make us look really good.